stand is number 2, that as a privileged, etc., feminist, we would not marry males with higher social statuses. That is the topic being debated. Before that, we do have one quick announcement actually from conveners / AGCOR, which is that for those of you who are familiar with the way that Austral's style debating works, it's like you do debates in hotel rooms. And so for day 2 of Easters, we're going to be debating out of the hostel rooms. So what that means is that affirmative gets 1 bunk bed, negative gets 1 bunk bed, and the judges get 1 bunk bed, because we need to trial it for feasibility for next year's Easters. Because for those of you who are at pre-council, no unis have yet bid for Easters, and so for financial reasons we're considering hosting Easters out of a hotel next year. So that's just an FYI, your stuff on day 2, it will all need to be taken out of the rooms for the purposes of the debating on day 2. Cool. Okay, we are going to start. Okay, by the way, happy April Fool's Day. That's obviously not happening. Okay, so we're going to start the debate now. The first speaker of the affirmative team is Isaac from the University of Macquarie. They were mistakenly assumed to have hitchhiked from Bangkok to Krabi when they in fact took a plane. Welcome,
To the back. Alright. Preface is, we didn't really get that much time to think of jokes, so my second and third speaker will have most of the jokes. So apologies in advance if bits of this speech are slightly serious. 3, 2, 1. For the vast majority of history, the institute of marriage, since its inception by state and by religion, was one that exclusively enforced patriarchal norms. That was when you were married off in various parts of Southeast Asia at the age of 8 in a hunt by men, because that was your duty given by God. Because in the West, it looks like being bred for the sole purpose of being used as a tool and a pawn of alliances for nation building and for the rearing of kingdoms. In religion, it was at every turn where the change prevented women and their autonomy from being able to access things like contraceptives, from being able to access things like ownership of their own body, and access to things like legal rights, and access to things like divorce, and all of those things. I'm going to bring 2 points of setup and 2 arguments. Firstly, on the interests of this actor. I think there are 2 broad things. The first one, and most importantly, is a prioritization of individual interests. That is for the simple reason that nearly no one in the state of any existence would bastardize themselves for other people to be happy. Everybody is inherently self-interested, and insofar as feministic outcomes or outcomes generally are an energetic, outcome even itself, you would want to achieve that outcome in a way that is, providing you happiness, things like that. Secondly, and quite obviously, a range and slew of variety of feminist outcomes in whatever way that looks like. Predominantly, we would characterize them to be, mainly advocacy and outreach and things like promoting rights and accessibility, stuff like that. And on a note, we would say this is likely to be closely aligned and to be the main mechanism through which you access your, social and your professional, privilege, insofar as, for example, if you are in consulting or strong board member of some economic bank or things like that. You might be advocating for things like microloans or advocating for DEI in your institution, things like that. Second piece of setup, what is the counterfactual? I think you would either prefer to be single or marry someone of lower status. I think these are the only other counterfactuals that affirmative can defend. So for very obvious reasons, we're going to defend those things. The final thing to talk about is marriage. I think marriage necessarily is a significant time sunk cost for the very obvious reason that is how most people in the world engage with the institute of marriage. But secondly, you're likely to skew towards a dependence on these individuals because most marriages include you sharing details with your partner, includes you sharing bits of your life with that person, sharing some form of emotional or spiritual counsel with them, or relying them for professional counsel. I think that's relatively obvious. I'm going to forward two arguments. Firstly, on dependence. Secondly, on a principal obligation. In this argument of dependence, we will just explain to you there is likely to be a disproportionate disparity in social status, and this looks like beyond social networking and things like that. It looks like things like your earning capacity and your capacity to access different networks and talk to other people, for the simple reason that social capacity is not the a-factual prima facie indicator of someone's success, but in order to be like socially high status, you also need to have lots of money and to be integrated with a bunch of society and to know a lot of people. Why is this likely to be a really, really bad trade-off on your autonomy and something that is likely to compromise you as an individual? I think there's a few broad reasons. The first one is that statistically, if you look at a bell curve, if you are privileged, if you're rich, you probably lie on the top 1 to 0.5% of that bell curve. If you want to find someone that is more privileged and has higher social status than you, that is way more statistically unlikely to happen, which means that the pool of potential suitors is incredibly, incredibly minuscule on this side negative bench. So, insofar as this is the predominant characterization of this debate that this side negative bench has to trade off on, I think that massively reduces your optionality and also massively reduces your capacity to negotiate. Second reason, I think you're likely to over-rationalize and misprioritize things in this marriage insofar as, firstly, there's not that many of these people, so now this person has a disproportionate value placed on them in that relationship. But also, secondly, the individual desires that you have, you're likely to over-index on and you're likely to overcommit on those things. The third reason is this disparity is probably bad when you're negotiating on things, when you have arguments, when you want to advance certain outcomes, or if you're just deciding, general things that people in marriages do. Which means, firstly, you're likely to be disproportionately beholden and reliant on this individual on side negative. And that's probably bad because you would, as an individual, want to prioritize your capacity to access freedom and things like that. Secondly, I think the external circles that you interact with are probably not very conducive to the types of things that you want to do, because this man that you were married into probably has a bunch of other male friends or other friends generally that are of equally high social status and are of equally disproportionately high social status compared to you, which means that this problem is actually not one that is exclusive to this man, but in all other facets in which you integrate and extend and kind of interact with this individual. Thirdly, I think there's going to be a massive amount of ostracization from the friends and the family members of this person that you're marrying into. It looks like being looked down upon because you earn less than this person. It means that in these discussions, you're likely to be forced to be a child-rearing mother, even when, or potentially when you didn't want to, because the family of this man disproportionately had that privilege to tell you otherwise. Fourthly, I think there are massive harms in terms of social norms and perceptions just because other people probably know about this marriage because you're very wealthy, you're probably privileged, you're probably high status, which means there's going to be articles and blogs written about you. Exists in the status quo, probably exists now. Third, I've stopped counting, so next one. Reduce autonomy, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Your marriage is probably quite bad. The final thing I want to talk about is two things. Firstly, mental health, and secondly, broadly, feminist outcomes. I think mental health is incredibly important, insofar as this marriage is something that is likely long. And even if you wanted to leave that marriage, because you lack the capacity on this side negative bench, you just are harmed as an individual. You are unlikely to approach this person and open yourself up to them. And that is a massive, massive harm that they have to cop for the eternity of that marriage on this side negative bench. If you enter a divorce is probably going to be really badly fucked towards you because you lack the legal fees, you lack the social perception, you lack the social circle to actually win in court or whatever. On social outcomes, the way that you're able to agenda change for the people that you care most about is something that you are fundamentally unable to access to because you lack the capacity to actually integrate and have the capacity to directly negotiate with the man because now they have way more power than you, so they probably own some amount of assets and things like that. Cool, on this principle, I briefly talked about this in my introduction, but beyond this, I think there's 5 broad reasons that the institution of marriage is disproportionately harmful to women, and there's an obligation on you as an individual actor to not facilitate and perpetuate that. 5 things. Firstly, the tool of marriage is often, in a lot of instances, legally binding in a way that is disproportionately beneficial to the male who, owns various forms of property and things like that. Second, obviously, for the vast majority of history and the vast majority of the world, it is religiously used as a tool to disempower women from being able to access rights and autonomy. Thirdly, there's just a massive social and normative expectation for women to marry, to rear children in the vast majority of the population outside of liberal states. In those contexts, that is particularly harmful and something you ought not perpetuate. Fourthly, there are a series of familial and monarchical expectations on these individuals to marry into these types of relationships, which is obviously particularly bad. Fifthly, there is just a transactional element to marriage, insofar as you're marrying into someone of higher status, where that is a key calculus that you're prioritizing. That is something particularly bad. So you perpetuate these things normatively, you perpetuate these things where you have a discrete and unique burden to overcorrect and push against. And finally, the inaction of not doing so is something that is particularly bad. Super proud to affirm.
Speech. The next speaker in the debate, the first negative, is Arwyn from the University of Sydney. And her fun fact is that during her group's road trip up to Queensland, they listened to the first minute of Wham's I'm Your Man brackets extended version 50 times.
Guys, how good is having some extra money? And how good is not having to tear yourself away from a relationship you were really interested in with a guy just because he has that extra money? But most importantly, if they try to explain why a disparity in relationships is bad and poisonous to those relationships, they never explain why that doesn't work against them. If there is a disparity in your relationship where that person is less wealthy or less privileged than you, we would say it is always better to prioritize the happiness, the longevity, and the enjoyment you get out of these relationships. That's how we're very proud to negate. The first thing I'm going to do in this speech is some setup, then I'm going to explain why the dating process just becomes infinitely worse, and then finally, why marrying rich actually just is a better option for your long-term marriages. But let's start with the setup. The first thing I want to note is that this actor probably wants to do a lot of good in the feminist movement, but as the affirmative team concedes, usually doesn't want to devote their whole life to it, especially if they've been able to use the privilege they've had, and instead of donating all of it and devoting their life to the cause of feminism, have done things that probably make them happy, have pursued higher paying jobs and a career and things like that. But secondly, we would say that the feminist movement overwhelmingly prioritizes autonomy for women and the choice that they have worked so hard for so many centuries to be able to afford to women. And we would say that it is bizarre to be in a situation where you're trying to tell yourself that if you have a guy that you're really interested in, you want to go out and date with him, but you feel like you can't make that choice because the feminist movement is telling you that you cannot have the choice in who you date, that would be a bizarre and very jarring experience and probably not something that you would enjoy as a feminist. But finally, we would say that if you are in this position of privilege, often the best thing you can do is just use your financial resources to help women who are less privileged. And if you have more financial resources because you married a guy who's richer, you can just do that to a greater extent. But secondly, we would say there are a number of societal norms and factors that would play into this relationship externally to you. The first is that often women in society do feel a societal pressure to marry up and to improve their economic prospects through marriage. And we would say that that is likely to cause a number of jarring instances in your friendships, which I'll expand upon later. But furthermore, often men feel like they have to be the breadwinner. They feel embarrassed when their wife makes more than them or things like that. Which is why if you married a guy who made less money with you and was less privileged than you, they would often feel like they would have to exert control in other ways that would often make your relationship worse, or at the very least, you just be married to a really insecure man, and that would suck. But notably, we think that the less you try and rule out dating men you're attracted to because of their social status, the more options you're able to have when you're dating, which means that you're more likely to be able to choose someone that is kind, does give you financial freedom, and that does support you and allow you to do the things you want to do. We would say, whereas under on their side, these social norms disproportionately apply. It means that even if you try to find a guy who's really nice and tries to give you financial freedom, they're likely to feel insecure about the fact that they don't make so much money than you. They're likely to try and exert financial control on you in a way that actually means that they get far less economic freedom under their side. Firstly though, why does the dating process just suck? The first thing we would say is that often you can't control who you fall in love with. It's super random, it's super amazing, but it means you have to draw yourself away from relationships and connections that you were really invested in. And that's a terrible experience. But secondly, often marriage is on the table very early on in a lot of relationships. Maybe once you've left university, you're in the like big wide real world, and you do have to start making choices about the rest of your life. Marriage is often on the cards at an early point in those relationships. What that means is, firstly, your social class often doesn't come up very early on into a relationship. So if you're going to be serious about this, you have to be prying into this guy's social status all the time and then being like, yeah, I'm sorry, I really love you, but you're a bit too rich for me. That's going to make you feel terrible, but also it's going to be super awkward every time you meet someone on a dating app and you're like, sorry, can you just tell me your annual salary because I need to feel to Like, how on earth are you going to do this? But secondly, you just feel sad because you develop feelings for this guy. You really like them, but you have to take yourself away. And thirdly, because of this, they never prove why this is actually going to have a tangible impact on the feminist movement. They never prove why this is going to improve the lives of the women the feminist movement probably cared about the most. Probably, unfortunately, not you because you're already pretty privileged. Then it's just likely to make you feel incredibly depressed because every time you feel sad that you have to draw yourself away from a relationship you were interested in, you feel like you're accomplishing nothing. You just set this random arbitrary goal for yourself, and that's not awful. But finally, your friends, the people who comfort you when you go through heartbreak, the people that will stay by your side no matter how your relationship goes, also cannot relate to this experience at all. Are likely to be able to give you very helpful feedback because they're like, oh, it sucks that you had to stop dating that guy who drove a Mercedes. But also, the way that you've arbitrarily applied this moral burden onto yourself just means that you're likely to try and make them feel bad about the fact that they are probably marrying up because social pressures have told them to do so. And so it means that your friends always feel like they're a lesser person than you. They don't want to spend time with you anymore. And it means that if those relationships went south, like they said, it would be an awful experience for you, and that would suck. But secondly, why is marrying a rich guy awesome for you? First point negative team is going to raise, money is great. It's great for yourself. You can buy things that you want to buy. It's great for your family. It means you can look after them. You can provide them with the economic prospects that you feel like you should be able to provide them with. But secondly, if you're a feminist, as I've already flagged, and particularly privileged, often the best thing you can do, given that the people around you are also likely to be particularly privileged, is just to give financial aid and financial resources to people that really need it. And you can do that with the great amount of money that you have by marrying a guy who's richer. But thirdly, we would say that marrying a guy who's more wealthy often gives you more freedom in where you're working because you can take jobs that interest you, or you can work or reduce sort of if that interests you. And what that means is you're actually able to do a lot more good for feminism because you can spend more time representing the women that aren't in positions of privilege, because you can join the boards that led to actual tangible change when you didn't have to be worried about providing for you and the guy who couldn't provide that much economically for your family. What that meant was that you actually were likely to get at least some benefit to the feminist movement if you married or wealthy. As said themselves, they say that you want to do charity and you want to do things like this. Surely that is the best way to do it when you have the freedom and flexibility to work in ways that you wanted. But finally, if you believe in feminism, it's about autonomy, and this decision would stand in spite of everything that every feminist message that you've ever said that said women should be able to have choices would do. You'd be flying in the face of this, and we think that would be a particularly depressing experience. But secondly, why is this guy likely to be a better romantic match for you? Firstly, the affirmative team that says that, well, in the bell curve, only 1.5% of men would be suitable for you, we would say it's not about statistics, it's about circumstance. And the types of people that you meet, like when you enter into romantic relationships, they're often with people that you've met because you did the same degree as them, because you work in the same company as them. And if you're particularly privileged, that means that the people you're likely to be organically meeting and actually feeling a spark in connection with are people that are likely to be in those same circles of privilege. So you wouldn't be able to meet people organically. You'd have to do, I actually don't even know how they would be able to circumvent this on the affirmative team side. I would be enthusiastic about hearing your response. But secondly, it means that you are just a better match because you have similar life experiences. You can relate to the life experiences of the person you're dating, which is pretty awesome. But it also means that you make big decisions from the same mindset, and it doesn't mean that you feel particularly greedy compared to your partner. But finally, no matter, disregarding all of that, why is the relationship that you enter into better? We would say for a few reasons. Firstly, there's just way less financial stress in your relationship. We would say for many relationships, not being able to afford mortgage payments, not being able to send your kids to the school that you want to, actually is a huge factor in the stress and deterioration of happiness in relationships, because you feel guilty that you can't provide more when your partner expects you to provide more, or there's always tension in how you're going to spend your limited financial resources. We would say that if you marry a guy who is richer, you just alleviate a lot of that financial stress, and it means that you do feel more happy. But secondly, men often get insecure when they're
they're not the breadwinner because of the social narratives that are so strong in our society. And that means they often try to regain control in other ways, such as insisting that they have shared bank accounts, insisting that you aren't able to make purchases that you'd like to make because you have to run them through him or something like that. And that would be an experience that was terrible, it would be humiliating, it would be unenjoyable, and you'd be bound to it for the rest of your life. Because even if you make a bad decision, which you are so much more likely to under the affirmative side, it's incredibly difficult to leave. There's pressure on women not to marry, to have kids, and never to get divorced. But you've also sunk your time and emotions into a useless relationship, and that makes you feel shit. You feel like you want to try and repair it. But you also feel like you failed as a feminist because you set an arbitrary goal you can never fulfill, and that is particularly depressing. But finally, even if you have a peaceful divorce, you just go back into the terrible dating market that we've already proven. The cycle continues. That's very proud to negate.
Okay, awesome. Next up on the affirmative team, we have Niamh from ANU. Niamh's self-described moderately fun fact was that she won the NSW State Spelling Bee in Year 4, and apparently the YouTube video still exists on the internet. So I guess that's a challenge to find.
I guess Arwyn proves in that speech why it is good to have money in general, but I don't think they do any mechanistic work to prove why you have direct access to your husband's money and why your husband, who already has probably better legal help because they come from a rich family, or they have, for example, their money locked up in things like property and trust funds, why you ever have access to that money and why that money isn't going to be used as something that is leveraged against you, that makes it harder to exit that relationship, that is going to be inevitably more coercive on their side. That's what we're going to talk about in this speech. Firstly, why it is important to have money when it is your own money and when you have autonomy over how you can spend it. Secondly, why this relationship is simply just going to be incredibly unhappy because rich people generally suck to date. And finally, a defense of why it is likely a good thing to be single in our counterfactual and defending that a bit more. Firstly, why it's incredibly important for you to have your own money, because I think they do very little to prove why it is good to have your husband's money and why you can do all of the things they explain that money is good for. The first reason is that you probably just don't have direct access to your husband's money. Firstly, that is because people who come from really upper class families care about doing things like, putting their money, like organizing their money in trust funds and so on, and distributing it amongst the family. But secondly, because I think these people are more likely to have values that, value things that are more socially conservative and care, are more status quo biased, and kind of care about providing and so on. I think that what that probably looks like is if your husband is rich, they own the house that you now live in, that they own the property that you have to stay in, and that obviously is a great amount of coercive power over you. But thirdly, even if they are making direct transfers into your bank account, or you have access to a joint bank account and so on, I think there is still a level in which you feel coerced because of the fact that you have to, for example, ask for money to pay for certain things because you feel like you owe your husband, because obviously in a relationship you would probably care about feeling equal to your husband, especially if you're a feminist person. That is something that you are going to feel more guilty about, whereas it's more likely that things like strings are attached to the expenses that you have, but we can probably prove that this band probably doesn't care that much about feminist causes. They're probably not going to be super happy about you donating all of your husband's money to those sorts of causes. That is something that could mean that money is withdrawn. That means your allowance, for example, is reduced. Obviously, where you are dependent on your husband's money, that is something that's going to be incredibly coercive. Why is it the most important thing in this debate that you have specifically your own money? And that is for the simple reason that women are the most affected by financial abuse. That is, women are the most affected where they are able to be coerced by their financial situation. And I think that looks like two things. Firstly, I think it looks like for example, where you earn the lower wage in the household, that is where your husband is able to point to the fact, point to a concrete thing that says you earn the lower wage, therefore it makes the most logical sense for you to stay home and raise our children, because we are able to earn more money if I stay at work than if you stay at work, and therefore we should value my career more, is the more concrete thing to point to when they say, well, you have more time to do the housework, because they think that because your work has like less value on the dollar or less value on the hour, that is something they can actually point to coerce you into doing those things like giving up your career or caring about your career less. But secondly, and most importantly here, it makes it incredibly hard to leave what could be a potentially bad or abusive relationship. That is because your husband owns the property that you live on. That makes it incredibly hard for you to escape a relationship that is going to be incredibly bad for you. That is because you are dependent on your husband's money to pay and care for your children, which obviously gives you an incentive to stay in a bad relationship where you want to provide for your children and ensure they can eat and ensure they have a roof over your head. That is an incredibly coercive thing. This only forces women to stay in relationships that are far, far worse for them, where there is that economic imbalance, and note that we do prove that economic imbalance is the tipping point in this case, because that is the concrete thing that people can point to, and that is the thing that actually affects whether people leave relationships in most cases. I think that's an incredibly important thing to weigh in this debate, because I think that basically just tells you that all of their benefits about having money is good can't need to be, I guess, redefended such that you are having your husband's money specifically is good and why you can even access it in the first place. But also, I think we can explain pretty clearly why this is just going to be generally an unhappy relationship and kind of defeat Arwyn's work about why this is going you can't control who you fall in love with and this is going to be great. And I think the crux of this point here is just that rich people probably are not a great person to marry or a great person to date. I think that, for example, looks like if you are someone who is, that looks like a couple of things. I think firstly and most importantly, it looks probably like a pretty significant value disalignment, because people who grow up in incredibly upper class families have certain values that are inculcated into them. They're probably, if they come from a generationally wealthy family, have been told that we have worked really hard for our money and we care about that. That is something that we should be proud of and that we did, and therefore they respect that way of earning money rather than other jobs activism and so on. They don't care so much about that. But also because you just generally probably are more status quo biased, because when you care about things like capitalism, when you care about things I guess economic conservatism, that tends to go hand in hand with things like social conservatism, which are probably going to disalign with your own values as a feminism. That has a couple of impacts. Firstly, I think it just looks like your husband probably has less respect for the sorts of work that you do as a feminist, because they don't see it as valuable, because they don't see it, because they probably just see it as sort of a lefty stuff that is not very important to them and they don't care. But secondly, they probably just don't care, you're probably just likely to be exposed probably to more casual sexism within your own marriage, and also they just probably don't care about having conversations about things that you care about, like feminist values and so on. They might say something like, well, you're not going to marry a person you don't like. I think two things for that. Firstly, when you choose to marry someone, it's obviously very hard to predict what they're like. A lot of people in their 30s get married after 1 to 2 years, or not usually a very long amount of time. When someone's on their best behavior at the beginning of a relationship, it can be hard to predict those sorts of things. But also, any sort of casual sexism can be easier to overlook when you are newly in love in a new relationship. That is something that you can when you want to avoid being single forever and you want to get married, that is something I think is very easy couples to overlook. So I think that is incredibly likely that the person you're marrying is going to be Clive Palmer or something. I can't imagine that's someone you would particularly want to be married to. I don't think it's a very interesting conversation, or they would particularly agree with your feminist values. I think it's a pretty bad marriage that you're likely to be in. But also, I think it's an incredibly important harm to weigh in the debate. And the reason for that is, because a marriage is something that is going to take up an incredible amount of time in your life. That is, for example, marriages last years to decades. That's going to have an incredibly outsized impact on your happiness, and that is something that you will care about. And secondly, just in time, in terms of time here, it is someone that you spend an incredibly, a large amount of time within that relationship. That is the person who takes up your home life. That is the person that is constantly will help you through things like traumas. That is the person who, supposedly knows you the best and so on. And that is obviously going to be incredibly hard if that person's values disalign with you so much that it makes it hard to even relate to that person or to feel like you're in love with that person in the first place. The second piece of weighing here is simply that if this is going to end in a really harmful way, and I think that relies on some of the points I've made earlier about why this is likely to be an incredibly coercive marriage. But where this is a bad marriage, it's probably A, more likely to end, but B, they are far more likely to treat you poorly when that happens, because they are more likely to be have sexist values, I suppose, but also because they have that financial coercive thing over you as well. That probably explains why you're not likely to marry the rich person that you like. You're probably better off marrying someone who is closer in values to you, who's probably a similar class to you, potentially a lower class to you. But also, finally, at the end of the speech, I'm going to defend why it is incredibly incredibly good to be single. Obviously, possibly not qualified to make this point as someone in a 2-year-long relationship, but why is it good that you are single in general? I think the first thing is that you just can date lots of people, and that exposes you to a variety of new experiences, new perspectives, allows you to just engage in different types of relationships. Obviously, that's just something that people generally value because people do tend to value things like love and sex and relationships and being able to see the different ways that you can do that. Secondly, I think you also just have a huge amount more autonomy, and that is something this person probably cares about as someone who's grown up and who's relatively intellectual and who cares about their career. That means you can change career or make more risky decisions without having to feel like you need to rely on a specific person to get their approval. It means you can do things like travel for a long period of time and are able to make those decisions yourself. But I think thirdly, you just are able to learn far more about yourself. You are able to introspect, you're able to think about what you value and what you care about, you're able to then dedicate your time to that. I think what we prove at the end of the speech is that money is only good when it's yours, but this is probably not going to be a relationship that makes you happy whatsoever, and why it is probably, in the long run, better for you to be single. I'm incredibly proud to propose.
First thing I want to note is the spelling bee video has already been found and dedicated in the group chat, so... Alright, next up we have Gypsy, also from ANU. And Gypsy's fun fact is that she spent the last 4 hours painting a total of 90 fingers with ANU, so slang.
Money is pretty awesome. If I had even $60 more, I wouldn't have had to wake up at 4 a.m. this morning and catch a 6 a.m. flight to Brisbane, and I probably would be able to concentrate a lot better in this debate. So I think that for what this team says, even having a reasonable amount of money, enough to fly to Brisbane, enough to support yourself, a relative amount of privilege in our society, having more is always better. Having more is by far the easiest way to actualize your interests, and I think the quickest way we win this debate. So in this speech, I'm going to talk a little bit about what this debate's about, what each side can support, in my view, although who's to say. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why, the financial side of it is better. Then I'm going to talk about why as an individual they're likely a better partner, and then maybe some stuff on feminism and the principle at the end. What is this debate about? Notably, the burden on the affirmative team is that you cannot marry rich. That is their criteria they cannot support. And that means that they, if they fall in love with someone rich, have to step away and say no. And for the people who go through that, I think honestly that is enough for it to be heartbreaking and bad and detrimental. They have potentially walked away from their Prince Charming, the love of their life, RIP to them. But for us, there is no comparative in the motion. I think we can stand for pretty much whatever we like, and we stand for choice. That is to say that you should choose who you want to marry. Social class should not be a definitive factor in your relationship or something you care about, which is why I think it's pretty ridiculous these people talk about being single. If you want to be single, go for it. On the outside, we are not at all prescribed to defend, only marrying people who are, 4 social classes above you and literally Clive Palmer. Obviously a bit unrealistic for everyone to do who is relatively single. There's not many Clives about, and is he already married? I think so. I'm not really sure. So I think that what that means is that we are the side for choice and they are the side for social class, and that means when they don't respond to all of Arwyn's impacts about how just considering social class in the dating process is really awful, having that be a factor in your relationship, and a reason you choose to marry anyone in the first place is pretty awful, as well as the fact that we explain, even if you don't buy that and we think that in the majority of times we have to stand for marrying someone richer, I think that we just explained that is the more rational choice for you a lot of the time, but that they cannot push, they have to stand on this really high burden of choice, we have to stand on the other one. We are the side of choice, they are the side of ruling people out because of social class, why then, if you set that aside, noting that that reduces their material about being single, but I think that reduces a lot of their material about, I don't know, like when they attack us for being forced into a really poor dynamic or whatever, it means we have that choice as well. I think I'm going to explain why generally marrying someone richer than you is just kind of awesome. And that's because you have money. We hear a kind of interesting response from second affirmative, which is, why will you have access to that money? Maybe this person's a real dickhead. Maybe, I don't think so, and that's because I just think it is the norm in our society that you allow your significant other to access some amount of your money in some capacity. You're already relatively privileged, you probably own a portion of the house to some degree, you have your own assets that you're bringing to the table, your own support, but also it's just the norm in our society that people, when they marry, like to give other people gifts and have shared bank accounts. If you have children, you probably both put stuff into an account and pay for your children. That is just the overwhelming norm that everybody does. I think it's a bit odd and weird for them to suggest you're going to marry literally the worst man alive who won't let you have a penny of his money because it's all in family trusts that he will give to his family. Notably, you are now his family, so you know, they're beneficiary of that, which is awesome. And also they say, he's likely to be socially conservative. Again, I don't think this is true. Education potentially correlates with being things like potentially more socially privileged. I think there's a good chance of the feminism, particularly when you consider that you can choose. Again, we don't think you're going to marry an absolute arsehole who doesn't let you have a penny of his money and is, abusive. Again, they say you're likely to not know, you fall into it kind of quickly, you're pretty well supported, you have money, you have choice. Same thing goes for them. There are plenty of men in, lower social classes who would do similarly, if not worse, abusive things to you. You can't know that going in. You have to trust yourself in this person. I think they can make an informed choice, and I think overwhelmingly they will have access to a portion of this money, which means money is great. They access it. They have an extra holiday house. They can buy their children more gifts. They can send them to a better school. Overwhelmingly for people, I think that is the stuff that they care about by far the most. And so even if your relationship is not great, I don't know, even if you believe a lot of their impacts, you just have all support to even do the career you enjoy doing because you don't feel the pressure of being a breadwinner. Again, I don't believe that they're like, your man's going to force you out of a job because they want you to look after the kids. Get a child carer. Like, they probably care about your happiness to some degree. Again, I think there's lots of solutions of that, which means that the abuse and dependency that they talk about just isn't true. You're not going to marry someone that awful, and even if you do, you have a lot of supports to leave that relationship or to help improve it through things like marriage counselling, whatever. Again, you're relatively privileged. You are educated. You're not massively dependent on them. I don't understand why the gaps in this direction is likely to be massive, but in their direction is likely to be really, really small. I think, again, that's not actually a change. And then I think Arwyn explains to you the actual change in this point, and where relationships do actually get a lot worse. And that's when you are dating a man who is of a lower social class than you, and maybe debating him occasionally, but those debates get a lot worse because he is really insecure about his position in that relationship, because society has told him since day one, through stories of Prince Charming or whatever the kids read these days, that he should be the one to buy the bread that goes on the table, and that's not the case. You're the one who owns the house that you're the one telling him to potentially consider being a stay-at-home dad, to sacrifice his career. He's got parents who pressure him and believe that that's not correct, and that means that he tries to seek back power in other capacities and other ways. And importantly, even if he's a good man, I think this is something that is likely to happen in a lot of instances, where their characterization relies on him genuinely being like hating you and not wanting him to have any access to your money. But I think it is quite likely that he does things like tries to convince you to do less hours at work, tries to convince you to, for example, give you access to all of your financial assets, does things like potentially threaten you because he's insecure that you're going to leave your relationship, because let's be honest, he's probably pulling because you are the better choice in the relationship. So I think that means the dynamic gets a hell of a lot worse. And that means that, we just have a better marriage. Money does not only equal more material access. It means the dynamic is a lot better, and all of the stuff they talk about is doing as well. They then make 2 points first. The first is about the pool of potential suitors being small. Again, I think Arwyn responds this really well when it's not about how many Australians there are you can date, it's about how many you are in the same social circles as, and I think this probably spans either side of you to the same degree in terms of privileged classes that you have access to. Again, on the outside, I would suggest you could date anyone in those classes. They say you have to rule out the top first, the top half portion. But even if you still only have access to 1% of Australia, that's 250,000 Australians. You're not going to date all of them or go through the dating pool. I don't think you're worried to be that dramatic. And I actually think the over-rationalization that they impact this point with gets a lot worse under their side, when you have to rationalize being in this relationship you're not really happy with, because you've gone into it based on your feminist values, based on all of the, I think, very good reasons that are given to you by Isaac at first about why marriage is often bad and why you need to go against social norms, and you tell yourself, if I drop down out of this, I am a bad feminist, I am letting women down. And that does things like mean you you over-rationalize it, you stick in it longer, you look at those sort of aspects of it rather than following your heart and your mind and all those good things that we should do more often. You are, more in your head and less overall. So I think we actually flip that. You convince yourself you are doing, God's work and saying in this marriage, and that leaving it would be really detrimental, which I think again flips the principle to some degree when we say that feminism is about choice, making sure you are happy, not about fulfilling this kind of arbitrary criteria that you're never going to match about being in the perfect marriage. A lot of women really want to have families, a lot of people are in 2-year relationships and very happy. I think that's the majority, go for it, be happy. The second impact they give you is that their families are really culturally different and you're likely to feel really isolated. Again, they're uncomparative here. Why is this not the same in the opposite direction? When you go to their house and you feel out of place because you have class guilt, because they are of a lower class than you, because you feel gluttonous, because you're wearing, a really expensive pair of shoes, or you've come straight from work at your top law firm or whatever, because you studied art history or something frivolous. And again, I think you are likely to potentially be more culturally closer when social norms expect that this is the right way to go. Again, maybe it is the bold thing to go against social norms, but it's definitely not the thing that is best for you as an individual. We allow you to fly in business class if you like, and that's pretty great.
Okay, our final speaker from the affirmative team is Jenny Lee from the University of Melbourne. Who is also a member of the illustrious CA team, and her fun fact is that she enjoys going to the casino, but mainly for free drinks, more than anything. Yeah.
Yes, can everyone hear me? Cool. Okay, my time will start 3, 2, 1. I honestly can use $10,000 from my parents and donate to feminism. And this is definitely going to contribute to the outcome. Probably there is going to be more people getting help. But this is never the choices I'm ever going to make in my life, because it's never going to give me the sense of rewarding. This is not my money. This is not the legit way for me to make my choices in my life. I'm just going to talk about 2 substantives in my speech. Firstly, on why this marriage is likely going to be quite shit, and secondly, on feminism donation, why this is less impactful in this debate, but thirdly, in terms of the counterfactual, why this is just going to be better. Firstly, on why marriage is likely going to be quite shit. I want you guys to go through the scenario where you find someone that is quite attractive, that is coming from higher social status, thinking about reasons why you're falling in love with that person in the first place. I think it's probably going to be, that person is going to be so intelligent, they know more things compared to you, they're probably going to be more mature, they have more experiences, and they take care of you all the time. That makes this person quite attractive. And that leads to a power imbalance argument we talked about in the first next speech, right? Because they know that the exact reason why you're falling in love with them, because they have seen so many other people falling in love with them in the past, and you're not the only choices that they're ever going to make. And that basically makes you having the sense of inferiority. You're probably not going to feel that, I deserve to be in this relationship because that person is so perfect. You're probably likely going to internalize the harm when they're criticizing you for you're not having a higher paid job, for you're not working enough to get into higher education. I think this probably also leads to scenarios, for example, you're probably not likely going to notice the red line or right sign in your romantic relationship. For example, the other person is likely going to be gaslighting you. I think the response coming from that is just quite simple. You're a feminist, you probably have a lower relationship, you're likely going to be rational. However, I don't think this is the reality in the real life. You're probably going to have seen so many friends, but even with yourself making a lot of irrational choices in the romantic relationship all the time. I think this is basically because of a reason. The fact that you're in love with the other person, the fact that you care about the other person, the fact that you romanticize them and thinking that they are the right person in your life. And that's exactly the reason why you're likely going to neglecting those red signs and likely going to constantly suffer because of this inferiority, because of this power imbalance. And I think The second reason why your marriage is probably going to be questioned is because the unfortunate reality, like a lot of men who are in that social status are likely going to pick women who actually suits with their interests the best, because there is no reason for them to find someone and get married and then that person is likely going to go against their interests. I think that also likely going to paint back to like the mechanism we mentioned earlier on, that men also have like a lot of alternatives that they can choose, and that basically push into a scenario that women are likely going to be easier to be manipulated in those relationships. They're likely going to give up their work simply because of the fact that they need to give birth for babies. I think the simple impact weighing after this argument is that the possibility for you to have a happy marriage is extremely low, and then the weighing here is quite explicit. Maybe 90% of the cases you're likely going to have like really fucking marriage that is likely going to make your life worse, comparing to the counterfactual that you get some extra money and you can donate to feminism. I don't think this is a choice that you will ever make as a rational person in the society. The second thing I want to talk about here is just like why you're likely going to fuck up your life. They say, oh, like you probably can't find childcare to take care of your children, and that's the reason why you're unlikely going to, suffer or like make a trade-off between your work and also like your marriage. I don't think this is ever likely going to be true. Number one, I think it is factually true that like a lot of wealthier families actually pay much more attention to, children's education. This means that they necessarily want to have like a parent present at a time when the children growing up, and that means that it's very likely you're going to suffer the pressure coming from their parents or coming from themselves to push you to stay as a housewife. But secondly, you're also likely going to give up your job simply because of the fact that you need to give a birth for a baby. I also think that it's very likely going to be true things like, people want to passing down their legacy. People think, having a family or like having babies is just really like a kind of like really like increasing their happiness for themselves. I think that's exactly the reason why you're likely going to make those trade-offs, and then extremely likely the trade-off is going to be harmful to you. The second thing I want to talk about here is on like feminism donation. I think taking the best case scenario on like you're probably going to have way much more money compared to before, and then this is the amount of money you're going to donate to feminism. The reason why it doesn't really matter that much is because the fact that this is an active debate. The fact that someone wants to donate, or like the fact that someone wants to do charity in the very first place, is because it gives you a feeling of reward, because you are using the money in a quite meaningful way that is likely going to save a lot of people's lives. However, in the counterfactual they're proposing, it means that you're grabbing the money from other people. This is not the wealth that you actually earn. This is not the money they're likely going to use without any due. I also think the second response here is just like, we also give like a lot of responses on why you're unlikely going to be able to control the money. I don't think they have the fiat power to say that you are likely going to, assume that you're likely going to be able to manage the wealth. I think this is unlikely going to be true. Number one, you're probably likely going to be asked to sign a prenup before you enter into this marriage. But number two, you're also likely going to be called a hypocrite at the time when you label yourself as being a feminist, and then at the same time, you're the one that is taking away men's money and using the money in the way that you want. But thirdly, I also think you're likely going to, be pressured for not to using it. For example, like your husband can simply excuse himself by saying that, oh, like I need to use the money for like the amount of work or like the amount of investment I need to use, and that exactly means that you're likely going to not able to have the full control of the wealth. I think like all those responses, I agree this is going to be mitigation, but then the fact that the comparative is just that you're probably going to increasing some amount of wealth under your side, but then the cost is that you're likely going to have a high chance to fuck up your life. I think that since this is an active debate and you don't actually know what is likely going to happen in the future, at a time when you're making this choice, when there is such a high uncertainty on like the life that you're going to experience is going to be questioned, it's probably not going to worth the trade-off on just like getting some forms of money and use the money to help the people that you actually want. Okay, let's then talk about the counterfactual. I think they're trying to talk about how like men coming from lower social status are also likely going to be harmful. There is also likely going to be power imbalance. Number one, I think it's more likely going to be the scenario that you're picking someone from like same social status that also erase a lot of harms that we mentioned in the case that they need to defend. For example, their parents are probably not going to ostracize you because they're likely going to have like same amount of wealth. You're likely going to receive the same same amount of education, that means that there is no reason for them to discriminate against you in the very first place. In a comparative, they need to defend is that exactly because that person go to a quite wealthy a private school, and that person has way much different opportunities or also experiences in their life, and that's exactly the reason why it's extremely hard for you to embrace into those people's circuit. But last thing I want to do some preemption in terms why it is extremely hard for people to opt out and do their side. I think this debate is likely going to happen at the time when you get into marriage for 10 years. Probably, you will never find out, oh, there is some problem with my relationship after dating the other person for 2 years. But it's extremely likely that you will find out those problems after 10 years in your relationship. That's exactly because, all of your defects, all of, the bad things of your personality are more likely going to be showing an authentic way to the other person, and you're going to interacting for an extremely long time. The implication of this analysis is that, number one, I think at the time when you go through the divorce process, it is extremely hard for you to get the right to raise your child. It is also extremely hard for you to, get back to your job because you have get into marriage for such a long time, you lose the skill that you already have. But secondly, I also think that it's likely that you were likely going to make the choices on stuck in this relationship that is quite emotional drilling, that is quite likely going to give you a lot of mental pressure. For all those reasons, so proud to propose.
Okay, finally, we have Niamh from UC. And Niamh's fun fact is that in a shocking twist of events, she's already lost her room key. So if anyone sees a room key near the bus terminal, let her know.
John has a room key that we found near the bus terminal.
Wait, for real? Yeah. Oh, wait, that's really good news.
Okay, thanks guys, Gilly.
Just where I need a shot. Timothy Chalamet, Davidson, Ryan Gosling, Andy Sandberg, John Krasinski, and Seth Meyers. It's just a short list of men who have a higher social status than me that I would very happily marry. And I'm not saying that this debate is about me, although I am a university-educated woman who likes women and supports women and, earns a stupid amount of money from debating coaching. I'm not saying it's not about me, but I'm also saying it's not about me. So if you want to know which actor you should sympathize with, she's here, and she supports the negative side of the question. I'm going to do 3 hard truths before I get on to the 20 things in this speech. Doesn't kidding, it's not 20. It's third negative. We'll talk about a couple of things in this speech, but let's be real, first years, not much you can do with third neg, so woo! I'm excited. Okay, 3 truths. 1, women aren't responsible for fixing the patriarchy and solving feminism. 2, women should choose who they marry. 3, we ought not encourage a system that supports and further polices and assigns moral value to the choices of women. If you disagree with any of them, vote affirmative, but you fucking hate women, so I guess it's for you. Okay, firstly, let's talk about the woman in the debate. First claim from affirmative, you become dependent, you become legally reliant, you become child-rearing, awesome term. 4 responses to this. 1, this is just not the fucking topic. The topic establishes that they're already privileged, so obviously their harms are mitigated to the extent to which you already have money and power. 2, more likely to have an unhappy marriage on their side because you don't get to marry who you want to marry. We get less divorce because at least you're choosing from the big pool available. I don't know, the pool is already so shit at the moment. At least we make it a little bit bigger for you. That seems like a massive benefit. 3, women also stay in shit relationships with people who are poor. What the fuck? Obviously women feel like the patriarchy means they have no agency to leave these people. Obviously there are other ways men bind women into relationships that isn't just through their wealth. Literally no other mechanisms provided from negative. I think that's crazy to assume that you only feel like you have to stay when you're led by money. 4th thing is, why would they be child rearing with privileged men?
surely like less privileged men also want babies. Like unclear why that isn't symmetric, but also if you want to give birth, woo, have a baby. All I would say is sort of a fucking gender reveal because those things are weird. Really out of hand, and I don't know why. That's my only tip. Second thing they say, you're ostracized because you earn less. Well, you're also fucking ostracized when you earn more. Like men feel so insecure, they're like, I don't earn enough money. Like the patriarchy is so bad. When you're in the same industry, they're like, you don't deserve that promotion. Like men suck shit. Now they just act irrationally because they feel insecure and they're like, I don't have a big enough penis. Like the fuck? Also, sorry, they then just become reliant on you. Now you have to fucking pay for everything. Now you feel like you can't leave because you have to support your husband, support your kids. Obviously you're not likely to go to the legal system and be like, I'm getting a divorce. No, because women feel like they have to fucking help everyone because somehow everything is our responsibility. Obviously that just means that you can't leave this relationship for now. Next thing they say, you don't feel good because it's money that isn't yours. I'm not affirmative, like I feel good with money that comes from anywhere. I don't know why, like if I found money on the street, and that's crazy. Also, like you're never gonna feel, wait, I don't even know what I have written here. Oh, you're never gonna feel adequate as a woman. Greta Gerwig, God, she like hits that monologue so hard. Insert her monologue in response to that argument. Just take the money, give it to the charity, even if it's Huggies. Then they say, and this is awesome, that he's not gonna allow you to have the money because he's like, no, I'm using it for investment, baby. Like, what? Guys, be so fucking for real. Yeah, they can gatekeep the money, but like they also can't gatekeep the money. Like, maybe they will, maybe they won't. You probably also have your own money. Now you just have maybe a little bit more money. Maybe they don't gatekeep 10% of that money. And that's 10% of money going to babies in need. And that's fucking neat. Next thing they say, you become a housewife. Great. Now we get empowered, successful, feminist housewives and stay-at-home moms. That seems like a super great thing to have. We should have more feminist housewives. Next thing, why is being a housewife bad? Terrible claim to make. Fact check that I have no idea who's adjudicating this. So wherever you are, think about that for 1 second and tell me it doesn't make you want to run into the ocean. But also, like if you're a poor man, you could still be a housewife. Women who work more than men still do 50% of the housework despite also having to go in to do their fucking jobs. You probably now just like lose hours at your sick ass job because you still need to look after like little Tilly. Silly. Next thing they say, you can marry someone in the same class. That's symmetric. You can marry someone in the same class on our side. You just get more options because you can also marry the rich ones too. So like, also that contradicts all of their stuff about how you get benefits when you marry someone who's poorer than you. So like, lol, note that. Okay, what do we tell you? One, you get mobility. On this mobility point, I've learned it, but I won't do it now. You can insert the Amy March monologue from Little Women about how women need to marry rich to improve their circumstances. I'll do it for you over the break. Next thing, you can now also increase your time because you're not the breadwinner. Like, woo, more money. Secondly, you also lose friendship. Never respond to this. Now you feel like your friends are policing your actions. That's really bad. Now you feel constantly judged. Now you feel like you have to marry a certain type of person who's lower than you. Now you need to find out if they have a boat. You can't even fucking whinge about it though. Because you can't go to your friends and say, oh, I can't marry him because I found out he has like a yacht. Great, right? You gotta just get on that yacht, babes. It's fine. The final thing we say is it's so much harder to meet someone organically. Debaters date debaters. Debaters don't date fucking aerial skiers. This is the same, right? Like if you meet them at the closed yacht club, that's whatever. At the end of this issue, 3 things. 1, obviously bad relationships when you're with poor or rich people. Men suck. It's rough. But affirmative harms are mitigated to the extent to which these people already have some agency and some privilege. That falls out of the debate. Secondly, let a woman choose who she wants to marry, even if she chooses badly. Women can be stupid. That's fine. She can deal with the consequences, but at least let her fucking pick. 3, even if the counterfactual leaves you with a worse partner, which is never proven by them apart from just like economic reasons, meaning you're going to choose a better partner. I don't think that that's sufficiently proven whatsoever. But regardless, there are just a whole list of other harms we've already told you that make the situation really bad. Next thing they talk about is like the movement. They're like, you principally should care about the movement, which means you should make your decisions. Like what? Like the problem with this, and the problem with the whole affirmative case, is it assumes that women have an obligation to make perfect decisions or risk losing the integrity of the entire feminist movement. That's fucking insane. Obviously that is not the responsibility of women. Obviously we should not gatekeep the types of men that women are able to date. Obviously this means a subsect of women would obviously never be able to date anybody richer than them because of their economic circumstances. We should not make the feminist movement about the wealth of the individuals women choose to marry. Get fucking men out of the focus of what women choose to do. Look, it's 7 minutes. I have much more to say. I've said it before. It's 3rd hate women.
Okay, that concludes WGM show today. Can we just have one more round of applause for all our speakers?